So if you agree, we could start.
Sure.
Because I'm looking forward to talking about your beautiful, beautiful trilogy.
Well, thank you.
I have to say first, hello to all our listeners. I'm Valentina Georgescu. This is the Children's Book Festival, litera.ro, on its first edition. It is a book festival dedicated primarily to children and young adults, but not exclusively. On its first edition, it is a first edition. It's taking part online between March 9 and March 13 this year. And today I have the privilege to talk to Rysa Walker, American science fiction writer, author of the Cronos files series, right here. The series has 3 books. It is, I think I got it wrong. It's time-bound, Then it's Time's Edge, that's book 2.
Yes.
With 𝗥𝘆𝗀𝗲𝗶 and book 3, Time's Divide. Yes. But with this one, time-bound, it all started. Here is the book. At that time, it was called Time Twisted Arrow, and it won in 2013 the Amazon Breakthrough Book Award.
Yes.
And since then, Rysa has written a lot more, and we thank her for that. As I was saying, today we are happy and privileged to talk to her, to find more about her work. Thank you very much, Rysa Walker, for being here today, for sharing your precious time with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, gladly. As I said in the intro, you are a sci-fi writer. And I'll get right to the point and ask you almost predictably, why sci-fi, Rysa Walker? How did it all start this love of yours?
Well, science fiction started a long time ago, and I basically have to credit Star Trek with that. I was watching from the time I was a small child. It was in reruns in the afternoon, so I would come home from school, and if I could get to the TV before my younger siblings did, I would be able to watch Star Trek. If they beat me, I had to watch Gilligan's Island. And it
wasn't that bad. Gilligan's Island was okay. It was okay.
Star Trek. And I think a lot of my attraction to it was I grew up in the Deep South, which back in the 1970s was still very racist, very sexist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I liked seeing a world, seeing a future where men and women, people of all races, actually worked as equals. And that was something I didn't see very often. And so it struck me as a hopeful future. And then I ended up getting my hands on a science fiction anthology a few years later. And it had Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov and several other, Robert Heinlein. And I just fell in love. It also had probably my favorite short story back then, at any rate, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I was hooked. I still had a hard time getting science fiction books, but I was able to get plenty of Westerns, plenty of romances from my grandmother, but science fiction books are kind of hard to come by.
I was going to ask you about this because on your official website, rysa.com, mm-hmm. your autobiography begins like this, and I quote right now, "I grew up on a cattle ranch in the panhandle of Florida. 30 miles, that is roughly 50 kilometers, from the nearest bookstore, and 10 miles, that is more than 10 kilometers, from a library that was sorely underfunded. The librarian's sole duty seemed to be telling me the book I wanted wasn't in, and shooing me back to the kids section. And here comes the interesting part for me. There were plenty of times that I would have sold my soul to get my hands on a new book. I mean, oh my God. And nowadays, end of quote. And nowadays, children, a lot of children, have huge access to literature of all kinds, on a Kindle book, or thanks to their laptops and smartphones. It wasn't the case for you. It wasn't obviously the case for me. Back then, in the dark communist era in Romania. And I'm sure you didn't have too many people to talk with about sci-fi literature, right? So taking all this into account, how did you manage to get to create characters, to divide plots, to invent difficult situations for characters and get them out of the difficult situation? It's glorious.
To some extent, maybe the lack of books helped in some ways, because I read the same books over and over and over again. And that is truthfully one of the best ways, I think, to learn to write, because that way you get to figure out what it is that the authors you liked did and how they managed to tell the story in a way that it resonated with you. So I think that was part of it. But also, if you've got a lot of books, it's very easy to just move on to the next story. It kind of pushes the story you were just reading out of your head and you move on to the next one. When you reread books, or when you are left thinking about the book that you just read because you didn't have another one, you start thinking about how things might have happened differently, about what might have happened after the story. So I think maybe it encourages you to imagine, encourages you to daydream a little bit. So, I mean, I always encourage young writers to read a lot, but I think rereading actually isn't a bad thing. I think it actually has some benefits.
Me neither. So it was all for the best in the end. So, as you said, you were a sci-fi geek.
Yes.
You were a speculative literature fan. When was the time when you said, now I'm going to try my hand at writing fiction?
Took me a long time. I was writing already, because before I started writing fiction, I taught college, so I was writing academic works. Before that, I helped run a dramatic group, and we presented plays on like alcohol abuse and stuff like that for local military. And so I was writing those. I've always been writing, but I continued to convince myself for a very long time that I didn't have it in me to write fiction. And then finally, I got to the point where it was like, well, if I'm ever going to try, I need to go ahead and do it. And so I was in a better situation by that point to be able, even though I had two young kids running around underfoot, I was working from home, teaching online. And my husband was very supportive, still is very supportive. And that made it a lot easier, because I worked my way through graduate school, worked my way through college with a young child at the time. So there was no time for any kind of...
I can understand that, yes.
And now I was in a position where I was able to, during summer breaks, I didn't have to run out and get a job waiting tables or whatever. I could actually... And so I finally talked myself into it.
That is encouraging, because I often dream about becoming a writer myself. And sometimes I tell myself, oh, the time has passed. But no, apparently it's too late.
I was 50 whenever I published Time Bound.
Yes, that is very encouraging. Never give up your dream. Thank you for this beautiful lesson, Rysa Walker. So the book is submitted for the Amazon contest, Time's Twisted Arrow, that later became Time Bound. It's this one here.
Yes.
It was your first book. Have you ever dreamed that it would get that far not to talk about winning the competition and changing your life.
Oh, it did, definitely. I had no idea. I self-published Time's Twisted Arrow in 2012. And then I decided to enter the contest kind of on a whim. Mostly I wanted to get to the quarterfinal stage, because if I got there, then I got a free Publishers Weekly review, and you have to pay for those, and they are not cheap. And when you pay for them, they don't even guarantee that they'll review your book. Some of the ones, and I mean, you're not buying a review, it's just to get it in front of their readers. And I didn't have the money to do that. I wasn't going to, do just the off chance that they would review it. So I thought, well, maybe I'll make it to the quarterfinals and I'll get that free Publishers Weekly review. And so, I mean, my family actually thought there was like a snake or something in my office whenever I got to quarterfinals, because I let out a shriek. And then, it just kept going, and it was amazing. I had a trip to Seattle for and we didn't know who had won. The 5 finalists were out there, but everybody knew that one way or another, whether you were the grand prize or you were one of the other prizes, you had a publishing contract. So everybody had a shot at making it. And I loved that, because that meant, we could relax and be friendly with each other. You didn't have to feel quite as competitive, because all of us knew we were at least, going away with the shot to get our book out there. Right.
And when you found out you were the winner, apart from crying out loud and scaring everybody who thought there's a snake in your office, did you celebrate, or how many days passed before you truly believed it, before you were totally
it took a while before I fully believed it. It took even longer before I was willing to take the risk and quit my day job. I did not do that until I knew that I had contracts for the other 2 books. Yeah. And, the amount of the grand prize was about what I would make in a year normally. So I was able to take some time, and then I got, an advance for the other 2 books too. So it was enough that I was able to actually quit my job without worrying too much about it. And it's still, writing still has a lot of ups and downs, because you have your periods when you get an advance, and then you have a long time whenever it's not, you have to budget.
It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job being a writer.
It's not, but I am very fortunate that I at least know that the mortgage is paid, because we have one stable, steady income in the family, and then mine is the ups and downs that mean, we get to take a nice vacation or whatever, or we get to take a vacation at all.
Right. So Time Bound was initially intended as a book for young adults, but I think adults read Time Bound or the whole trilogy as much as young adults. And I would ask right now, what is the average age of your readers?
Probably 30 years old is the average. And a lot of that, I think, part of it is that there is actually a fairly large audience for young adult books among adults. And part of that, I think, is because that period in your life is when you make so many decisions. And so coming of age stories, whether they're speculative fiction or not, are appealing to a lot of different age groups. But another reason, I think, is because my publisher is connected to Amazon. And I think their marketing in a lot of ways is more, if it's like, the one book you get that month or whatever, the adults get to choose. So, and so a lot of adults have passed it on to their children, to their grandchildren, and so forth. And it depends a lot on the country. I've noticed with translations. Brazil, for example, the publisher there does a lot of marketing to, and so I'll notice that when they send something out that I'll get, new Twitter followers or new Facebook followers, and they'll mostly be teenagers, whereas a lot of my other readers, my US readers, tend to be a little older.
Great. Now, for the listeners who maybe happen not to know the Cronos files yet, would you be kind enough to give us a quick non-spoiler presentation of the series? Thank you.
Sure. I'll focus mostly on the first book because spoilers start coming into play quickly if I go to the second book. Yes.
We'll talk about this one. Time-bound.
Time-bound centers around the story of Kate Pierce Keller, who is a normal 16-year-old, aside from the fact that she has been suffering from some panic attacks, or at least that's what she thinks they are. Her grandmother comes to town and informs her that those actually aren't panic attacks, they're timeline shifts. And she is a historian from the future who got stranded in the past. And Kate's grandfather, same thing, only they're not together. Saul Rand, her grandfather, is the reason that they were stranded in the past. He sabotaged, I can't talk well, right? Sabotaged the mission and stranded 24 historians in the past. And as a result of that, he was able to establish basically a religion, a cult that brought him money, brought him power. And each time she felt these so-called panic attacks, it was a sign that the timeline was shifting. In short order, her grandmother has disappeared. And as a result, she has too, as if she's not under the protection of a Cronos key. Her parents never met. And she needs to find a way to save her grandmother at the 1893 World's Fair, where she was killed in the past. And if she can do that, she can hopefully set the timeline straight, but that's going to come at a cost because she's made the mistake of falling in love with someone in the current timeline, and he won't remember her at all. And there's also, I should add, she knows that there were other iterations of herself that have been trying this before, and she actually was involved with somebody from another timeline that she doesn't even remember, but he's convinced that, she was his Kate. So things kind of get complicated after that. And the rest of the series revolves around basically attempting to set the timeline straight and get back to a point where if everything is as good as it can be.
Yeah. It sounds complicated, but it's so nicely written that you cannot
thank you.
Leave it before you finish it. I can say that. Let's analyze a little bit the characters, because you mentioned a few of them. There is a whole array of them in the three books of the series. It's Kate, Catherine, there's Deborah, Saul Rand, there's Prudence, who else? Chairman Dunn, there's Trey, Charlene, Connor, yes, and there's Paula Patterson, who's actually the president of the United States at a certain stage. There's also a dog, Catherine's dog, Daphne. And sometimes you have to deal with 3 or 4 different realities. I mean, how do you manage to keep track of everything? Do you have, like we see in the movies, the investigators who have a wall with threads?
Everybody thinks I have those. They say I would love to see a planning wall, and I don't. It's all in here. And I guess
that's marvelous.
Now, there are occasionally I do have, and some of that is editors that put it together, like a character Bible that I can go back and double check, eye colors and things like that. so I do have that kind of thing written down. But as far as the different timelines and the different versions of people in the timelines, that's a lot of it happens, I think, in my subconscious. And I guess maybe it feels real enough to me. Each one of them feel real enough to me that I'm able to keep it straight. But by the time I was done with the third book, I was kind of wishing I'd had one of those planning walls. I was pulling my hair out.
Yeah,
I was the last one.
Really, reading the books, I kept imagining you like this, sitting in front of a big wall with pictures and red threads or blue threads connecting the characters to one another. That was my image of you writing this book. And about, so when you're writing, are you saying that you let characters take control of your writing from a certain point on, at least?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The characters are in control. I mean, when I start out, I have a vague idea of where the plot is going. And usually I have kind of an end goal, but it changes along the way. My acquisitions editor, she knows that when I give her a prospectus, it's not going to be that if I'm saying what book 3 is going to be, oh no, it's going to be very different by the time we get there. Yeah. And part of that is if I don't let the characters take control, they kind of stop talking to me. And,
I can imagine that.
I can end up with writer's block really easily. And I try to keep several different projects going so that if one is not working on a particular day, I can go write on another one for a while, or if I can do a research day or whatever. But generally speaking, the characters, Stephen King had said one time that he does something very similar, which is you have an idea, you have a situation, and you put the characters in it and you see how they react. And I think that's kind of how mine works, although a lot of it is more in my subconscious, and I'll wake up and it'll be like, okay, that's what needs to happen. So
you definitely have to let the characters take on.
Oh, yes.
And let them talk to you.
Yeah, I had one character in because there's a second Cronos series. It's not a young adult series, but there's a second Cronos series. And one of the characters was supposed to die at the end of book 1. And he was stubborn. He stuck around. Not only did he not die in book 1, he made it all the way through the series and got the girl at the end. So it's like, okay, you were persuasive.
She wanted it this way. Yes. How do you choose the names of your characters? Do they tell you their names themselves?
Kate did. In my Delphi series, Anna definitely did, and Deo did. They came. Catherine was another that, and Prudence. Those were I knew what their names were. Others, I had to play around with. I think I changed Trey's name 3 times in the first few chapters. Kiernan, that one came pretty quickly and stuck. But a lot of the others, and for just random characters, I'll do a name generator and click through until I find one that works, and then I may still end up changing it later on. But for the main characters, usually after a couple of chapters, those are kind of in cement.
I see. About the process, about writing, you were saying that sometimes you leave one project aside and take care of another one because it makes you feel comfortable like this. Do you write every day, like let's say like an athlete that has to train to keep himself fit?
Not every day. I mean, I'm working every day. I don't take weekends off or anything. I'm working at some point. It may only be 2 hours, but I'm at the computer doing something with my books. It might be a research day. I might not actually get anything written, but I'm just reading, archive. One of the things I'm working on right now is set in 1889, and it is an alternate history thing, and I'm basing a lot of it on the history from the era. So I'll have
research
open or whatever, and be going through various news articles just to kind of get a feel for the era.
So you're not writing just for the sake of writing, just to keep yourself trained?
No. Usually I do write something each day, but I basically, when I get into the mood to write, when I get into the groove of it, it comes pretty quickly. It may take me a while to get into the groove, and sometimes there'll be a couple of days where the characters aren't talking to me or whatever. So I'm like, fine, go off and sulk, and I'll do something else. I've got these other characters that are talking to me just fine, and I'll go play with them for a while. So
I can totally get it. Yeah. What was the hardest aspect of the creative process when writing the Cronos files?
For the first book, it was finding time to write, because I started it when my youngest son was 3. And I was teaching actually at 2 different schools, I think, at that point, online, but it was, I had a pretty large course load. So finding the time to actually write was the challenge there. By the time I got to the last book in the series, it was keeping everything straight and I always view it as kind of uncovering the plot, which you scrape everything else out of the way and find the plot. And occasionally I would lose what was going on there because there were multiple realities going on. And so getting into the groove for each one of those was sometimes a little difficult. But like I said, once it starts flowing, and usually a deadline really gets me moving. I am a deadline. So I'll pull all-nighters for 2 or 3 nights in a row if I need to meet a deadline. And sometimes that's my best writing, because it's mostly coming from the subconscious. It might have grammatical errors or something, or not have a period where it's supposed to be or a comma where it's supposed to be, but I can work that out during the editing process. So
I can understand that, because I'm a translator, and when the deadline comes, yes, I work day and night as well. Because also as a translator, you need to have inspiration to connect to the book.
Oh, absolutely.
To get into the mind of the writer. And it's not always that easy.
Oh, I can imagine.
So it's actually rewriting the book in your language. And it's not the same as when writing it.
Many idioms. I mean, it's not like just putting it through Google Translate. You've got idioms that won't make any sense in a different language. So you have to find a way to convey what the writer was trying to say without using those words.
You have to feel the book. And talking about this, I was wondering, do you all sometimes fear that some of the translation might not show exactly what was in your soul, in your mind, when you were writing it?
I think that does happen sometimes, because I definitely had readers who maybe English was not their first language, but they originally read it in English, and they went back and read a translation. And I had one of them tell me, no, I prefer it in English. And then I have others that it's really clear that either the writer got what I was trying to say, or managed to say something that they wanted to read, because the translation does well, and it captures a good audience. But I think it's really hard to know. I've always been kind of curious, because I don't read that many languages. I have 2 that I can read a little bit, and so I've looked at the translations on those, and I'm always kind of curious. There are some that make me. I wish I could read Brazilian, because that one took off. I'd love to see what they managed to say that actually captured. And maybe it'd be something I could pull into another book, because they may have done better than I did. So
that's why I was asking, because I imagine you have to have this fear, because it's the books you're writing are your children, and you need to know that they are safe anywhere in the world.
You feel like, I mean, you have to kind of let go. And I mean, it's the same way, I think, if you're letting it be, translated to a screenplay or something, you have to let go and you have to say, okay, this is going to be a different creation. And I think sometimes the fact that, I mean, I always listen to the audiobooks that are made from my book, because the narrator brings something different to it. It's part of the performance. And so if I'm needing to refresh my memory about characters or something before I write the next book or get back into the groove, I can listen to the audiobooks. Can't read them after I've written them because I'll spot, a comma out of place or something that makes me, but I can listen to them. And I think it's the same sort of thing. You have to view it as a different thing. It's based on your work. And so, I mean, the translations are based on my work, but it's actually somebody else's interpretation of it.
At this point, would you like to read the fragments of one of your Cronos files?
Sure. I would, I'm putting it on my phone here because I can enlarge the text and I don't have to go find my glasses if I can get my phone to open. Technology
is sometimes tricky.
This, let me set the scene a little bit on this. This is after the time shift, Kate and Trey, the guy that, well, she's not in love with him at this point. It's not quite in love, but she is growing closer to him at any rate. He has driven her to out of state to try to find the man who would be her father if it was a normal timeline. But
I remember.
Yes.
I remember.
So this is on the way back after she's discovered that her father doesn't know her and he has another family.
Right.
And so I will start with that.
Thank you.
We drove without saying much toward DC. Somehow I dozed off, my head against Trey's shoulder. When I awoke, we were on the Beltway, a few miles from the turnoff to Bethesda. Trey was singing softly to an old Belle and Sebastian song. He had a nice baritone voice, and the car was dark except for the dashboard lights and headlights on the highway. I had the urge to close my eyes and stay in the moment, not thinking about anything else that had happened. I'm sorry, Trey, I said, sitting up. You've been wonderful to chauffeur me all over 2 states, and I thank you by falling asleep. I noticed that his sleeve was damp. Had I been crying in my sleep? No apology necessary, he said. I think you needed to shut down for a while. I was going to have to wake you pretty soon, though. I don't know where your grandmother lives, except you said that it's near the school. At the thought of Catherine, I felt another wave of guilt. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I knew my grandmother had to be frantic, and although I was still a bit angry, it was less at Catherine than at this faceless future grandfather who had reached out from someplace I couldn't even imagine and snatched away my entire life. I should have gone back to Catherine's house rather than trying to pull Dad into this. Brief images flashed through my mind, the 2 boys running by the pond, Robbie crawling into Dad's lap, and suddenly I felt protective of them. Trey, what if he's right? What if who is right? My dad, Harry, I mean. I'm going back to my grandmother's, and she says I'm the only one who can set this straight, who can fix the timeline. I don't know what that means, what she wants me to do, or even if I can do it. But what if I succeed and those little boys don't exist when I'm done? How can that be a good thing? Maybe Harry is better off there with Emily, with that family. And who else exists in this timeline but not in the other? Who has the right to say that the other timeline is better? Trey thought for a long time before he answered. I don't know, Kate, but someone, apparently your grandfather, is going to a lot of trouble to change things. And he doesn't sound like he much cares who ceases to exist in the process. You, on the other hand, are actually bothering to ask that question, even though you didn't create this problem. So I'd trust your judgment more than I would his if someone has to pick and choose between timelines. Do you follow my meaning? I guess so, but no, let me finish. You told me earlier that you're pretty sure that you don't exist in this timeline. And based on what we've both seen, I think you're correct. Sooner or later, something will separate you from that medallion, and I think you'll pop out of existence just like those photographs did. He reached over and took my hand. And if that's true, well, I've decided I don't really like this timeline, and I'll leave it there.
Very romantic. It's written in first person, and do you identify yourself with Kate or with any of the characters? I mean, this scene is so profound, so romantic.
Parts of me, I think, are in all of my characters, which is kind of scary given Saul Rand.
Right.
Yes. But definitely, there's some of me in Catherine and Deborah. I used to teach history, so some of that is the author's voice. Kate is, in a lot of ways, what I remember from being, a romanticized version of being a teenager. She is, she has a far better relationship with her father than I do. I think a lot of my, the extent to which I am like Prudence is more our relationship with our father, which is necessarily. And I'm much more like Harry in other ways because I like to cook. Catherine can't cook. Deborah doesn't cook. So there are little bits of me in most of the characters. So are idealized versions of people in my family, things like that. And in some ways, I guess maybe Kate is kind of like a daughter I never had because I have three boys. And I never had.
I know that. That's beautiful. I only have one. He's an adult now, but three, very nice.
Well, and all of mine are adults now too. So
you have more time for writing.
Yes, I do.
I have to ask about the medallion. I mean, it's a gorgeous piece of jewelry, and as a woman, I cannot help but ask you, where did you find inspiration for it? Does it exist, or?
Well, actually, hold on. Let me see. I can show you the picture right there.
Yeah.
It's a Cronos repo.
Yes, nice. I would like to have a T-shirt like that. It's very beautiful.
I designed it initially because I wanted it to look like a clock, but we used to make them we had a 3D printer and we used to make them with a bronze printing, bronze fill was the name of the stuff. And then the glow in the dark kind of thing too. So I used to make small versions of it that I could give away at book fairs and things like that. And we sold them for a little while, but it's really complicated to make. And it was not worth the effort we were putting into it. So we aside. Originally, it was supposed to have 12 spots like a clock where the glow fill stuff would show through, but that was too fragile. It didn't work as well. So I ended up making it 6. But I wanted it to kind of look like a clock, but also have the hourglass in the middle, since that's how Kate describes it.
Right. It's correct me if I'm wrong, is the key that historians kept in the past use to get back to the headquarters, right?
Yeah. Yes. It reads their genetic signature. They hold it in their hand and it reads the genetic. Right.
And talking about, again, time travel, because that's the idea. That implies by no means a lot of research besides time, yes? And of all the 3 types of sources, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary, it is the primary sources that give depth and to the plot, and to the setting, to the dialogues. And with Cronos files, you prove to be, it's not a big word, but you prove to be a magnificent researcher. That's my opinion. And I think it's everybody's opinion. Because throughout the book 1 and book 2, you give so meticulous, so small details about things that don't exist anymore. You take the reader to 1893 to the International Chicago Fair, exhibition, and there you describe every little corner as if you yourself were there. And that's very difficult. And then you take the reader to 1963, Dallas. We know what happened then in Dallas, unfortunately. You take the readers to 1905 Boston, and then to 1938 Georgia, during the Great Depression and the segregation and so on. That's a lot of traveling in time. That's a lot of research. You speak about characters that don't exist anymore. I was impressed by how you described the ghastly hotel that H.H. Holmes, the infamous women's soccer, built. Where did you find all the inspiration? How did you not get lost in the thicket?
I do get lost sometimes. I dive down the rabbit hole and end up, I'll think I'm going to get some writing done and I'll end up researching all that. But a lot of times you get kind of serendipity by doing that, because you end up finding things that you wouldn't find otherwise. My young son laughs because he works at night too. And so he comes in and he'll see my computer and I'll have, 27 tabs open, and they'll all be the New York Times archive back to 1889 or whatever. And one way that I was able to describe the World's Fair very clearly is relying on the work of some excellent historians who have actually done, it's like a video, but it's animated, and you can ride the tram around, the gondola rides. And I knew about those because I taught a American history course and put together a module that was online that used multimedia sources for the World's Fair. So I had some background in that era already. And given, I've always read Stephen King and that kind of stuff. There was a serial killer walking around the fair. How could I pass that up?
Yeah,
and
right.
The papers from that era were so meticulous in the way that they covered that trial, the house and everything. So I was able to find some really good sources for that. Erik Larson's book, Devil in the White City, was invaluable for that as well, because he gave me a ton of primary sources that I could go back. And
Erik Larson can do that. I absolutely love him. Yes.
So that one was, I already felt like I had been to the fair. So it was easier to write those segments. Boston was a little harder because I wasn't there as long with my characters, but I was able to find some early motion picture that showed me like one street. And so I dig around in Internet Archive and a number of other places online and find what books I can, if there are any film clips from the era. And I do a lot of walking on Google Maps. I check to see if the roads are basically the same as they were back then. And then I, like Dallas, that's what I did there, so that I could, know which streets to turn on and all that kind of stuff. I walked the same path that Kate walked. And New York, I have a lot of stuff set in New York, and it's the same there. So
I see. Having a PhD in political history helped. You have a PhD in political history, and there's something else I cannot remember right now.
It's my PhD is in political science with a focus on history. Right. And so I ended up teaching both government courses and history courses. By the time I guess I was doing mostly history by the time, because I taught some women's history classes, and then I focused on the progressive era. So looking at, roughly the 1890s through the 1930s. It's about research as well. And there's a very interesting story for me, how you chose the name Cyrus. It's a very interesting story behind the name Cyrus that you use
behind the character. And I would like our listeners to know the story because it's very interesting. And it shows how meticulous a researcher you are.
And that's something that was serendipity, because I didn't know even though I grew up in Florida, I did not know the story of the Core Unity, which was the little cult in Central Florida that believed that we lived inside a hollow earth. Right. And I had never heard of them. But when I was researching the 1893 World's Fair, going through newspapers again, I stumbled upon something that was talking about Cyrus Teed was his name. Right. And he called himself Koresh, which was Hebrew for, and that's where you get Koreshan unity. He probably had a stroke or something, and at least that's what I would assume, because he started thinking that he started having these visions, and he gathered in this period. It was right after the American Civil War, or at least a couple of decades after. So there were a lot of women that never married because so many men died in the war. Right. So he had a large group that he could choose from, women who might have a little bit of money, and he convinced them, okay, we're all going to go live together in this paradise down in Florida. It's going to be a communal situation, asexual. So, it's everybody will just live as brothers and sisters. And so they set up the commune down there. And so I picked the name Cyrus because it was a good group for my villain to basically just gobble. Right. He was able to step in and then take that religion and build on it to create Cyrus International. Right. So, and then there were bizarre things that happened later on. Recently, Donald Trump was compared by religious groups here in the country to King Cyrus. And they printed a coin that had Donald Trump's face on one side and Cyrus' face on the other. And of course, everybody knew my views on that man. So they were quick to tell me, oh, have you seen the coin? He's a Cyrus. So it was very funny.
It was indeed. Most of the time, literature deals with traveling back in time, because here things seem to be rather simple. You either want to right the wrong or effect some changes, or you need to meet fabulous historical figures that you need to better connect with. For example, I would like to meet Agatha Christie because I'm a huge fan of Agatha Christie. Or you need to better understand, right? Or you need to better understand historical events and how they still affect our lives today. So that looks pretty clear why we would like to travel back in time. But in your last book, and that's Time's Divide, you travel 3 centuries forward. Kate. This must be very challenging because you can always have doubts and think that people will find your writing dated or silly. It's not that easy.
It's not. Going that far ahead, though, in some ways was kind of liberating because I'm not going to be alive in that year. So if there's anybody who says, see, it's nothing at all like she said it was going to be, if anybody's still reading the books, then
I don't care.
I don't care. I'm gone. I don't have to deal with it. It is a little more challenging in some ways to write near history, which I did with my Delphi series that followed the Cronos files. And that was set just a few years. Actually, it's set like in our present. But my view is those are different timelines. So some things changed and some things didn't. But it is a little, like I was hoping that we would have a little more drone technology by now, not like military drones, but like, delivery drones. And that hasn't really taken off. So that's a little dated. If somebody reads Delphi, they would look at that. But, when you're talking about the 2300s, it was looking at stuff similar to like Star Trek. I was able to, predict forward based on science fiction convictions. And truthfully, if somebody is accepting the premise of time travel, usually though they're pretty open-minded. They would accept
a mistake or two because
exactly. I mean, I'm a little more nervous about the next series I'm working on, which is dealing with Mars colonization, and that's set in the 80s. So I can see people, going, oh, I don't think it's going to be that, that's going to happen by then, or this is going to happen by then. But it's the story is not to predict the science. The story is to talk about the philosophical constructs and the ideas, and the science is just kind of the trappings that you use to get there. So,
anyways, time travel seems to be very in since forever. I mean, both in literature and cinematography, there are so many titles that deal with time travel. And in your opinion, why is that? Why are we so fascinated by time travel?
Well, I think it's part of what you were saying is simply the wanting to go back and meet somebody, wanting to go back and find out what happened. I have a couple of things that I would love to find out from my research for my dissertation that I was never able to, just that right historical source. And so I'd love to go back and be a fly on the wall. But the other thing I think is so many of the time travel stories look at alternate histories. And I think we like to imagine how things would change. And that time travel allows us to do that. I mean, there are some time travel stories that don't have the idea that, no, you can't change history.
Right.
Which is an interesting thing in and of itself, because it's always like you're doomed no matter what. Groundhog Day is a good example, sort of being stuck in that loop and nothing ever really changes.
Right, right.
But I think that's a lot of it is wanting to examine those other lives, those other possibilities. Because I mean, we all think about choices we might have made
of course
ourselves, and how life might have turned out differently if we had made a different choice. And time travel gives you a mechanism for examining that, for thinking about those alternatives.
When I was young, I used to watch Quantum Leap. I loved that series because, it made you optimistic. I mean, I was always curious, what else will he change, the main character, in the next episode? Or will he change anything at all? As in the episode about Marilyn Monroe, where he could change one first attempt of her to commit suicide. But of course, in the end, we know what happened, unfortunately, again.
Yes.
But at least once the main character of the series succeeded in saving her. Yes.
And that, I think one reason, and I hadn't really thought about this before, but I think one reason time travel might resonate with so many people is readers time travel all the time, actually. When you read a book, about or whatever, you're getting into the mind of that character, and you're going to that place. You're living another life. You're living another reality. So we're already doing that. We're already accustomed to doing through fiction. So I think it's just kind of another layer on top of that, where you're acknowledging that that reality, or the shifting reality.
Well, you have many readers, many followers in the mail. I could see that because I watched a few vlogs of young adults. While reading your books from the Cronos Files series, or talking about them, And I imagine that some of them might want to become writers themselves. Maybe they will someday. Would you give them any advice?
The first advice I would give, that I always give, is read. And they're usually doing that anyway, but I have definitely had, usually it's adults, but I've had adults tell me, oh, I think I'd like to write a book, but they don't read. They say they don't read. And I'm like, okay.
How can you write if you don't read?
So if you don't read, you can't write.
Of course.
So read, and like I said before, reread. It makes a difference. I think writing fan fiction can be an excellent way to get started as a young writer. Those opportunities didn't exist that much when I was younger. I mean, we didn't have online, so you couldn't, go online and post.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and that the advantage there is you're really only having to come up with a plot and pacing. You can kind of work your way into having to develop the whole thing, and I think that can be kind of liberating, because it's less nerve-wracking. You're less worried about getting everything right, because you know that whoever looks at it already has a decent idea of who those characters are. So you can just, like I was talking about before, with imagining what might happen after the story ends, you can just take that to into your fan fiction. So, and the other thing, Ray Bradbury had an excellent piece of advice, which was, you only fail if you stop writing. Just keep trying. I mean, don't talk yourself out of it. Tell yourself, give yourself permission to do what you want to do. Right.
Great advice. Great advice. In one of your interviews, you were asked to talk about your favorite quote at that time. It was something from Dalai Lama. I don't know if it's still your favorite quote, but I found it so profound. It's such a powerful message. Maybe more powerful today with everything that's happening around in Europe, around the world. What was that quote?
That quote.
Can you still?
Yes.
Is it still your favorite, or one of your favorites?
Definitely one of my favorites, and that is, be kind whenever possible is always possible. I don't live up to it as often as I would like. It's been hard the past few years. Life has been, and like you said, in Europe right now, it's hard. I mean, and with COVID and people with different views and not wanting to protect each other over here, it's real easy to let anger take hold, and I've been guilty of that way more than I should.
I think we all are
hard to avoid. And it's there's another quote though that right now is really resonating with me, and that is by Albert Einstein. And he said that, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember it exactly, but the primary problem in the world isn't those who do evil, but it's those who stand by and watch while others do evil.
How true. How true.
It's just heartbreaking when you feel like there's nothing you can do, and yet so often people aren't stepping up to help others when they need to. And I'm thinking now mostly about with COVID and just, putting yourself before others. So.
Yeah, it's not always easy.
It's not.
We have to try, but we have to try. Never stop trying. Yes, that's actually the key to success. If you could travel back in time, where would that be and why?
Probably would be 1868, and I would go to New York and I would go to Boston. And the reason is what I was talking about with my dissertation. There was a strategy. My dissertation was on the women's suffrage movement in the United States, and a strategy that they had to gradually educate women to the point where they understood why they needed the vote. And they did this through women's clubs. And I was never able to find the smoking gun, as they say. I knew that they set these up as suffrage kindergartens, but I was never able to find something in print. It was just always in their letters, these little cloaked things they would say. So I would love to be a fly on the wall at a meeting in Boston and in New York. And then I could go back to my dissertation advisors and say, see, here it is. I know this is true. I've known all along. And now I have proof. So
maybe it will come sometimes in your dreams. You never know. Maybe you will connect somehow. Maybe that era and find a way to prove what you're saying is right.
I proved it enough that they went ahead and passed the dissertation. That wasn't a problem. But they're like, that little bit. And you just frustration.
Yeah, I guess it is. For those who want to learn more about you and about your work, I guess there's a lot of people who would like to know more about your work because it's fascinating, really. Where can they find you online?
They can find me online at Rysa.com, just the first name.com. Lucky to have a 4-letter URL. I got it a long time ago.
You are.
So it's easy to remember.
Right.
And I am also on Facebook at Rysa Walker Books. But those links are on my website. So really, you only have to remember the website. And you can sign up for the newsletter there. I don't send it out very often. I'm the world's worst in terms of procrastinating. But that's good. You don't get spammed. And that way, I only send something out whenever there's something new. So that's I don't get a lot of emails here. So.
Before we end this interview, because I'm told that time is almost up, and before letting you go back to your writer's cave, I suppose you have a writer's cave. I have my office.
Oh, I do.
Here. It's my translator's cave.
That's one reason to write at night is because my husband is in my writer's cave right now working, and then I'm the second shift, and I'll take it over tonight.
And it's all yours, the writer's cave. Do you have a message for your fans, a message you would like to share with your fans in Romania, with your readers in Romania?
Thank you. Thank you for reading my books. Thank you for listening to me chatter today. And also, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you to the people of Romania right now, because on a personal level, my husband's parents were born in Ukraine and have strong ties to the country. And it's just heartrending seeing what's going on right now. And you have opened your hearts to those who are running away from pure evil. And I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, I have goosebumps right now. Really, I have goosebumps because it's almost a week since I can't help but crying sometimes because it's awful what's happening.
It is, and I feel for you there because it's so close.
Yeah, just imagine how sick everything is, because as I told you before, it snowed today in Bucharest, and I went this morning for a walk because I like to walk in the snow. And just imagine, my first thought was, are these real snowflakes or is it atomic ashes? That's sick. I mean,
that's hanging over your head. Yeah.
And next thought was, are you crazy? What are you talking about? It's just snowflakes. But this is it's so stressful.
It's hard to
this level. Yes.
Yeah. Well, all of you are
sincerely hope it will.
Prayers and it's got to end.
It's got to end, definitely. Dear Rysa Walker, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking to you, and
thank you so much. Thank you for your books as well, because and I know there will be many more, and we're looking forward to reading them in Romanian. And good luck with your future projects. And I sincerely hope to have the opportunity to meet you in person in Romania.
I'm looking forward to being able to travel again. It would be nice.
It would be nice. And hopefully very soon in peace and harmony.
Yes.
Have a very nice day, Rysa Walker.
You too. Best wishes. Bye.
Bye.